There's a ship, and I need to tell you about her because most people today have never heard her name. And that's a tragedy because without this one vessel, the entire Pacific War could have turned out very differently. Her name was USS Enterprise, hull number CV-6, and the Japanese called her the Gray Ghost because no matter how many times they thought they'd sent her to the bottom of the ocean, she kept coming back. This is the story of the most dangerous American warship of World War II, and I promise you, it's not what you think makes a ship dangerous. Now, before we dive into this, I want you to grab something to drink, maybe settle into your seat, because this story is going to take us through some of the darkest and most desperate days America ever faced at sea. Days when one ship and her crew literally stood between victory and complete collapse in the Pacific theater. And if you appreciate these deep dives into real history, the stories that actually matter, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe because we've got plenty more coming your way. All right, let's get into it. It's November 1942, and the war in the Pacific is going absolutely terribly for the United States. Japan has swept across the Pacific like an unstoppable tidal wave, taking the Philippines, Malaya, Singapore, the Dutch East Indies, and pushing further south with every passing week. Now they're threatening a little island in the Solomons that most Americans had never even heard of before the war started. That island is Guadalcanal, and it matters more than almost anything else in the Pacific at this moment, because if Japan takes it back, if they manage to push the Marines off that bloody piece of jungle, they'll control the supply lines to Australia and effectively dominate the entire Pacific theater. And here's the problem. America is running out of ships to stop them. You see, by November 1942, the United States Navy's carrier force has been absolutely shredded over the previous 6 months. Lexington went down at the Battle of Coral Sea back in May. Yorktown was destroyed at Midway in June. Wasp was torpedoed and sunk in September. And just 4 days ago, Hornet was sent to the bottom at the Battle of Santa Cruz. Saratoga is sitting in Pearl Harbor under extensive repairs from torpedo damage. That leaves exactly one operational American aircraft carrier in the entire Pacific Ocean. One. And that carrier is Enterprise, and she's barely floating. Lieutenant Commander Herschel Smith is standing on Enterprise's damaged flight deck at Noumea, New Caledonia on October 30th, watching 75 construction workers weld steel plates over bomb craters that by every regulation in the United States Navy should require months in a proper shipyard to fix. The carrier took 2 direct bomb hits at Santa Cruz just 4 days earlier, and the damage is severe. Her forward elevator is completely jammed, twisted metal that shouldn't be repairable outside of a major naval facility. Her hull has a massive bulge on the starboard side where near misses buckled the plating. One fuel tank is still leaking oil into the harbor. 75 men are wounded, and 44 are dead. By every protocol, every regulation, every standard operating procedure in the Navy, Enterprise needs to be sent back to a shipyard for months of proper repairs. But there is no shipyard available, and there's absolutely no time, because the Japanese are coming, and they're coming now. Smith is the ship's damage control officer, and he's not the kind of man who gets his name in newspapers or gives rousing speeches to the crew. He's from Michigan, Naval Academy class of 1922, and he's what you'd call a technician, a problem solver. He knows Enterprise better than he knows his own home. Every frame, every bulkhead, every watertight door, every pump, every electrical junction, every ventilation trunk on this ship, he's walked it, crawled through it, traced every system with his own hands. When damage occurs, he doesn't need to pull out blueprints and study them. He can close his eyes and visualize exactly what's broken, exactly what systems are threatened, and exactly what needs to be done to keep this ship alive. His damage control teams have been trained to a level that few other ships in the Navy can match. Every man knows his specific role, every team knows their equipment inside and out, and they've drilled constantly. Fire drills, flooding drills, Bomb damage drills in daylight, in darkness, in rough seas and calm seas until muscle memory takes over and chaos becomes routine. Standing with Smith on that damaged deck are 75 men, and they're not sailors. They're not even Navy damage control specialists. They're construction workers, Seabees from the construction battalion, the Seabees. These are welders, carpenters, mechanics, civilian tradesmen who joined the military and brought their skills with them. And right now, Smith has to figure out how to fix a warship using these guys while the ship simultaneously prepares to sail back into combat. This isn't normal, you have to understand that. Aircraft carriers don't get repaired at forward bases with construction workers while enemy forces are actively closing in. But nothing about late 1942 is normal, and Enterprise is literally all America has left in the Pacific. The Seabees get to work immediately, and for the next 4 days they work around the clock in rotating 8-hour shifts. Sparks fly across the flight deck as even the ship rocks gently in the harbor. They're cutting steel plates, shaping them to fit the irregular bomb craters, then welding them into place. The forward elevator is a nightmare, twisted metal that shouldn't be repairable outside of a major naval facility. Her hull has a massive bulge on the starboard side where near misses buckled the plating. One fuel tank is still leaking oil into the harbor. Fuel lines get rerouted, and everyone just hopes it'll hold. It's not perfect, it's not even close to proper, but it's enough to keep the ship operational. Then on November 10th, the message comes through that changes everything. Japanese battleships are heading for Guadalcanal with the intention of bombarding Henderson Field into rubble, destroying the American airbase there, and then landing reinforcements to retake the island. Enterprise has to sail immediately, not tomorrow, not when repairs are finished, now, tonight. Captain Osborne Bennett Hardison has been in command of Enterprise for exactly 10 days. He's 49 years old, Naval Academy class of 1916, originally from North Carolina, and he's staring at damage reports that say his ship shouldn't leave port for months. He looks at Smith and asks one simple question: can she fight? Smith doesn't sugarcoat the situation. The forward elevator is still compromised and could fail completely if stressed. The hull still has leaks that could worsen in rough seas. The watertight integrity is not where it should be, and if they take another hit in the wrong place, particularly near any of the hastily repaired sections, Enterprise will sink fast. But her engines work, her steering works, her catapults can still launch aircraft. She can fight. Hardison nods once and gives the order. Enterprise will sail at dawn. November 11th, 0600 hours, and Enterprise leaves Noumea Harbor with the construction battalion still aboard, still welding, still hammering, still frantically trying to complete repairs even as the ship steams toward what everyone knows will be a major engagement. You can see the damage from the dock as she pulls out. The bulge in the starboard side is visible even from a distance. The hastily welded patches on the flight deck look exactly like what they are: emergency repairs. Oil is still seeping from somewhere in the hull, leaving a faint sheen on the water. But she's moving, her engines are turning, and her air group, what's left of it, is ready to fly. Enterprise's air group has been gutted at Santa Cruz. VF-10, the fighter squadron known as the Grim Reapers, has lost half their pilots. VB-10, the dive bomber squadron, has lost aircraft and experienced crews. VT-10, the torpedo squadron, is down to barely functional strength. But the men who remain have been doing this for months now. They know how to fly off a damaged carrier in rough seas. They know how to navigate by dead reckoning over hundreds of miles of open ocean with nothing but a compass and their training. They know how to find targets in that vast emptiness and then somehow find their way back to a moving ship that's just a tiny speck in an enormous ocean. It's not routine, it's never routine, but these guys make it look like it is. November 12th arrives, and Enterprise launches her first strikes against Japanese forces that are approaching Guadalcanal. The carrier is operating 200 miles from the combat zone, which means her aircraft have to fly through weather fronts, navigate across open water, find their targets, complete their attacks, and then make it back.
Her bombers, the Douglas SBD Dauntless dive bombers, find the heavy cruiser Kinogasa steaming northwest after bombarding Henderson Field the previous night. The cruiser's captain thinks he's escaped, that he's gotten away clean and is heading back to safety. He's wrong. Very wrong. The Enterprise dive bombers roll into their attack from 12,000 feet, pushing their aircraft into 70-degree dives and accelerating to nearly 300 miles per hour. The pilots have practiced this maneuver thousands of times, and they release their 1,000-pound bombs at 1,500 feet before pulling out hard at 500 feet. The G-force is crushing them into their seats. The bombs fall, and they hit. The first bomb strikes the cruiser's forward gun mount, and the explosion tears through the bow, immediately starting fires in the gasoline storage area. The captain and executive officer are killed instantly, just gone in that first explosion. The ship begins listing to port as more bombs hit. Near misses buckle the hull plating and cause additional flooding. A second wave of bombers arrives, and more direct hits knock out Kinogasa's engines and jam her rudder. Without propulsion or steering, she's finished. She capsizes at 13:45 hours, and 511 members of her crew go down with her. The pilots fly back to Enterprise, land on that patched-up flight deck, refuel, rearm, and eat cold sandwiches in the ready room while they wait for the next mission. Some of these guys are 19 years old. Some have been in continuous combat operations for 9 months. All of them know that more targets are coming and that they'll be going back up soon. That night, November 12th into the 13th, a desperate and chaotic surface battle erupts in the darkness near Savo Island. American cruisers and destroyers intercept the Japanese battleship Hiei and her escorts in what becomes one of the most brutal close-range night actions of the entire war. The battle starts just after 01:30 hours, and the two forces encounter each other at point-blank range in total darkness. Searchlights snap on, illuminating targets, and every gun that can bear opens fire. The range is so close that some shells pass completely through ships without exploding because their fuses haven't had time to arm. Hiei is a Congo-class battleship, 36,000 tons of steel, mounting 8 14-inch guns and heavily armored. She should absolutely annihilate the American force, but the night action is pure chaos. American destroyers launch torpedoes at close range. American cruisers fire as fast as their guns can cycle. Hiei takes dozens of 8-inch and 6-inch shell hits. Her steering is damaged, her forward turrets are knocked out, and a torpedo hit floods multiple compartments. By dawn, she's crippled, barely making 8 knots, trailing oil, and listing to starboard. The Japanese should scuttle her right there, should abandon ship and let her sink, but they try to save her. They think they have time. They're wrong. At 06:15 on November 13th, Enterprise aircraft find Hiei limping northwest about 30 miles from Savo Island. She's barely moving, clearly damaged, and her 3 destroyer escorts can't protect her from what's about to happen. Enterprise launches the first strike at 06:30. 6 F-4F Wildcat fighters for combat air patrol, 9 SBD Dauntless dive bombers loaded with 1,000-pound bombs, and 6 TBF Avenger torpedo planes carrying Mark 13 torpedoes. They find Hiei at 07:20, and the dive bombers go in first, screaming down from 10,000 feet. The battleship tries to maneuver, but her damaged steering makes her sluggish and predictable. The bombs hit. One strikes near the forward turret, another hits midships, and fires erupt across the ship. Then the torpedo planes attack, coming in low and fast at 200 feet, skimming the wave tops and dropping their torpedoes at 1,500 yards. The battleship's anti-aircraft guns fire desperately, filling the air with tracers, and one Avenger is hit and crashes into the sea, but the other torpedoes run true. At least 2 hit Hiei's port side, and the underwater explosions tear open her hull. Then Marine aircraft arrive from Henderson Field, more dive bombers and torpedo planes, attacking in waves. Then Army B-17 bombers from Espiritu Santo join in, dropping bombs from 20,000 feet. Their accuracy from that altitude isn't great, but with enough bombs, some are going to hit, and they do. Enterprise launches a second strike at 0900, a third strike at 1100. Marine squadrons from Henderson keep rotating through the target area. Army bombers keep coming back. The Japanese try to provide air cover with Zero fighters flying combat air patrol over Hiei, but there are just too many American aircraft. They're completely overwhelmed. By 1400 hours, Hiei has taken an estimated 5 to 8 torpedo hits and 7 to 8 bomb hits. Her hull is breached in multiple locations. Water is flooding the lower decks faster than the pumps can possibly handle, and fires are burning out of control throughout the ship. The captain gives the order to abandon ship, and destroyers come alongside to take off survivors. At 18:15 hours, as the sun sets on November 13th, the Japanese scuttle Hiei with demolition charges. She sinks into the darkness, taking 838 of her crew with her. But the battle is far from over, because more Japanese ships are coming. Cruisers, destroyers, and battleship Kirishima are approaching Guadalcanal for another bombardment run, and 11 Japanese transport ships are steaming south, packed with 10,000 soldiers from the veteran 38th Division. These are battle-hardened troops equipped with artillery, tanks, and ammunition for a major offensive. If they land on Guadalcanal, Guadalcanal is lost. It's that simple. Enterprise launches strikes, and her pilots are beyond exhausted at this point. They've been flying multiple missions per day for 3 days straight. Some have been shot down, rescued by destroyers or submarines, and then flown again the same day. The maintenance crews are performing absolute miracles, keeping damaged aircraft flying with spare parts scavenged from wrecks. And the construction battalion is still working, still repairing battle damage from Santa Cruz, while new damage from Japanese air attacks keeps appearing. November 14th, and Enterprise bombers find the Japanese transport convoy at 0600 hours. 11 transport ships, tightly packed in formation, heading straight for Guadalcanal at 12 knots. Each transport is carrying between 800 and 1,000 Japanese soldiers. These soldiers are the elite troops of the 38th Division, veterans from combat in China, and they're loaded down with everything needed for a major offensive. If they land, Guadalcanal is lost. It's that simple. Enterprise dive bombers attack first at 0630, rolling in from 12,000 feet, diving at 70 degrees, accelerating to 280 miles per hour, releasing bombs at 1,500 feet, and pulling out at 500 feet. The transports have absolutely no chance. They're cargo vessels, not warships, with thin hulls, no armor, and they're loaded with fuel and ammunition. When the bombs hit, the ships don't just sink, they explode. The first transport to die is Okinawa Maru. A 1,000-pound bomb hits her amidships, penetrates to the engine room, and explodes. The ship literally breaks in half and sinks in minutes, taking 300 soldiers down with her. Canberra Maru takes 3 direct hits. Fires spread through the ship uncontrollably. The captain tries to beach her, but she sinks before reaching shore, and 450 men drown. Brisbane Maru is hit by 2 bombs. One hits the forward hold that's loaded with ammunition. The explosion blows off the entire bow, and she sinks stern first. Marine aircraft from Henderson Field join the attack at 0900 hours. More dive bombers finding targets everywhere because the convoy is breaking apart, each ship trying to escape independently. But there's nowhere to run. The ocean here is 2,000 fathoms deep. If a ship sinks, the men can't swim to shore. They just drown. Army B-17 bombers arrive at 0930 from Espiritu Santo, bombing from high altitude. Their accuracy is poor compared to dive bombers, but the transports are large targets, and more hits, more fires, more sinking ships. Enterprise launches a second strike at 10:30 hours with fresh pilots, more bombs, more torpedoes, and they find targets still burning from the first strike. The slaughter continues through midday. By 1400 hours, 7 of the 11 transports have been sunk. Arizona Maru, Brisbane Maru, Canberra Maru, Kinagawa Maru, Nagara Maru, Nako Maru, and Shinanogawa Maru, all gone, resting on the bottom of the Pacific. Thousands of soldiers have drowned, and the survivors are clinging to wreckage, waiting for rescue that won't come fast enough. The 4 remaining transports, all damaged and burning, make a desperate run for Guadalcanal, hoping to at least beach themselves and get their troops ashore before sinking. They steam through the night with fires visible for miles, and American forces on Guadalcanal watch them approach through binoculars. The ships reach the beach at Tasafaronga at dawn on November 15th and run themselves hard aground. Their bows touch shore, soldiers jump into the water and wade to the beach, but most have lost all their equipment. Their artillery is at the bottom of the ocean, their tanks are gone, their ammunition, food, medical supplies, everything is lost. Of the 10,000 soldiers who left the Shortland Islands, fewer than 2,000 make it to shore with weapons. The rest are dead or have landed with nothing but the clothes they're wearing. That night, November 14th into the 15th, comes the final surface battle of this 4-day nightmare. American battleships Washington and South Dakota, along with 4 destroyers, intercept the Japanese force that's trying to bombard Henderson Field. Battleship Kirishima is leading 4 cruisers and 9 destroyers south, and the night action is devastating. Japanese ships sweep aside the American destroyer screen, and South Dakota takes heavy damage and loses communications. But when the Japanese concentrate all their fire on South Dakota, trying to finish her off, they reveal their positions to Washington. The American battleship hammers Kirishima with 16-inch and 5-inch guns at close range. Multiple hits set the Japanese battleship ablaze, and the Japanese scuttle her after midnight. That's the second Japanese battleship lost in 3 days. When dawn breaks on November 15th, the naval battle of Guadalcanal is over. The Japanese have lost 2 battleships, 1 heavy cruiser, 3 destroyers, and 7 troop transports. The Americans have lost 2 light cruisers and 7 destroyers. But Henderson Field is secure. The Marines will hold Guadalcanal, and Enterprise has been there for absolutely all of it. Captain Hardison sends a message to the Navy Department on November 16th, and in it he writes, "The emergency repairs accomplished by this skillful, well-trained, and enthusiastically energetic force have placed this vessel in condition for further action against the enemy." He's talking about Smith and the construction battalion, the men who kept Enterprise fighting when by all rights she should have been sitting in a shipyard for months. Vice Admiral William Halsey, commander of the South Pacific area, sends a dispatch directly to the Seabee detachment, commending them for their willingness, zeal, and capability in completing repairs with speed and efficiency during actual combat operations. But here's the real story. Here's what those 4 days actually meant in the larger context of the war. 1 damaged carrier, kept operational by 1 brilliant damage control officer and 75 construction workers with welding torches, had helped sink 2 battleships, 1 cruiser, and 7 transports, had helped save Guadalcanal, had helped turn the entire Pacific War. The Japanese never attempted another major offensive at Guadalcanal after November 1942. They evacuated their remaining troops in February 1943, and the island became an American base for the rest of the war. And it all, every bit of it, hinged on those 4 days when Enterprise fought while still under repair, when she should have been nowhere near a combat zone. Now, this wasn't the first time Enterprise had defied death, not by a long shot. She'd been scheduled to return to Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, but bad weather delayed her task force, and she arrived on December 8 to find the harbor in ruins and her country at war. Her aircraft had actually flown over Pearl Harbor during the Japanese attack, and 7 of her dive bombers were shot down by Japanese fighters, an American friendly fire that couldn't tell friend from foe in the chaos. 8 of her airmen died that day, 2 were wounded. Enterprise was the only American carrier to have men at Pearl Harbor during the attack, and 3 days later, on December 10th, Enterprise aircraft found and sank Japanese submarine I-70, making her the first Japanese warship sunk by American forces after war was officially declared. Enterprise drew first blood. February 1, 1942, and the Enterprise Task Force raids Kwajalein, Wate, and Malawialap in the Marshall Islands, sinking 3 ships, damaging 8 others, and destroying numerous aircraft and ground installations. Japanese bombers counterattack, but Enterprise maneuvers at high speed, and all bombs miss. The carrier escapes with only minor damage. April 18, 1942, Enterprise escorts Hornet on the famous Doolittle raid. While 16 Army B-25 bombers launch from Hornet to bomb Tokyo, Enterprise fighters fly combat air patrol and attack Japanese picket boats that spot the task force. The raid shocks Japan, proves their home islands are vulnerable, and forces them to pull air defenses back from the front lines, which has strategic implications for months afterward. Then comes June 4, 1942, the Battle of Midway, and this is where Enterprise really proves what she's capable of. She's serving as flagship for Rear Admiral Spruance, one of the most intelligent and careful tactical commanders in the United States Navy. Spruance understands that carriers are fragile, that timing is absolutely everything, and that one mistake at the wrong moment could lose not just the battle, but possibly the entire war. The Japanese plan is to occupy Midway Island, draw out the remaining American carriers, and destroy them with overwhelming force. Admiral Yamamoto is commanding the combined fleet, with 4 carriers in the striking force, 2 more with the occupation force, and 7 battleships, including his flagship Yamato, the most powerful battleship ever constructed. The Japanese have more ships, more aircraft, more experienced pilots, and they fully expect an easy victory. But American intelligence has broken the Japanese naval codes, and Admiral Nimitz knows the attack is coming. He positions Enterprise, Yorktown, and Hornet northeast of Midway, hidden beyond the Japanese search radius, waiting in ambush. The battle begins at 0630, when Japanese carriers launch 108 aircraft to attack Midway Island. The island's defenders launch everything they have to intercept the Japanese carriers. Army B-25 bombers, Marine fighters, dive bombers, torpedo planes, all attacking the Japanese carriers in uncoordinated strikes, and all of them fail to score hits. The Japanese shoot down most of the Marine aircraft, and their carriers seem absolutely invincible. It's 7:05. The American carriers launch their strikes. Enterprise sends 33 dive bombers, 14 torpedo planes, and 10 fighters. Yorktown launches 17 dive bombers, 12 torpedo planes, and 6 fighters. Hornet launches 35 dive bombers, 15 torpedo planes, and 10 fighters. That's over 150 American aircraft heading southwest to find 4 Japanese carriers somewhere in that vast ocean. But coordination falls apart almost immediately. The squadrons become separated, navigation is difficult across featureless ocean, and some squadrons fly the wrong direction entirely and never find the enemy. Hornet's fighters and dive bombers miss the Japanese carriers completely, run low on fuel, and have to ditch in the ocean or return to their carrier. Enterprise's Torpedo Squadron, Torpedo Squadron 6, led by Lieutenant Commander Eugene Lindsay, finds the Japanese carriers first at 0920. They've got 15 torpedo bombers, Douglas TBD Devastators, and these aircraft are slow, obsolete, and desperately vulnerable. They attack without fighter escort and without dive bombers to split the Japanese defenses. The Zero fighters swarm them like angry hornets. Japanese ships fill the sky with anti-aircraft fire. The torpedo bombers press their attacks at wave-top altitude, dropping torpedoes at point-blank range, and 13 of the 15 are shot down. Lindsay is killed. Lieutenant Junior Grade George Gay is the only survivor from his aircraft, and he ends up clinging to a seat cushion in the ocean, watching the rest of the battle unfold around him. Torpedo Squadron 3 from Yorktown attacks next. 12 more Devastators and 10 are shot down. Then Torpedo Squadron 8 from Hornet. 15 aircraft and 14 are destroyed. Of 41 torpedo planes that attacked the Japanese carriers, 35 are shot down in flames. 0 hits on any Japanese carrier. The torpedo attack seemed to have accomplished absolutely nothing except waste American lives and aircraft. But here's what actually happened. Those torpedo attacks, those suicidal runs by brave men in obsolete aircraft, they drew the Japanese combat air patrol down to sea level. The Zero fighters are chasing torpedo planes at wave-top height, and they're not watching the sky above them. And at that exact moment, at 0925, Enterprise dive bombers arrive at altitude. Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey is commanding Bombing Squadron 6 and Scouting Squadron 6, 33 Dauntless dive bombers total. He launched at 0706 and flew southwest on the expected intercept course, but at 0820, when he reached the point where the Japanese carriers should have been, they weren't there. McCluskey makes a decision right there that literally changes the entire war. Instead of returning to Enterprise when his fuel is running low, instead of playing it safe, he expands his search. He flies northwest, then northeast, searching, hoping, praying, knowing that if he guesses wrong, his aircraft won't have enough fuel to make it back and his entire squadron will end up in the water. At 0955, one of McCluskey's pilots spots a lone Japanese destroyer steaming northeast at high speed, and McCluskey immediately recognizes what this means. That destroyer is racing to rejoin the carrier fleet. He turns his entire formation to follow that one ship. 5 minutes later, at 10 o'clock hours, he sees them. 4 Japanese carriers in perfect formation: Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, and their flight decks are crowded with aircraft being refueled and rearmed. There are bombs and torpedoes scattered on the decks, aviation fuel hoses are running everywhere, and the carriers are at their absolute most vulnerable moment. McCluskey doesn't hesitate for even a second. He splits his formation. 17 dive bombers will attack Kaga, 16 will attack Akagi. They roll into their dives from 14,000 feet, and the Japanese see them coming, but it's too late. The Zero fighters are still at sea level, completely out of position. Anti-aircraft guns open fire, but they can't track dive bombers coming straight down at 300 miles per hour. The dive bombers scream down at 70-degree angles, pilots center their targets in the bomb sights, compensate for wind and their own speed, release at 1,500 feet, and pull out at 500 feet with crushing G-forces. The bombs fall and they hit with devastating effect. Kaga takes 4 direct hits. One bomb penetrates the flight deck and explodes in the hangar deck among aircraft that are being rearmed, and the explosion sets off aviation fuel and munitions in a chain reaction. Fire spread instantly throughout the ship. Another bomb hits near the island superstructure and kills the captain and most of the bridge crew in one blast. More bombs hit the flight deck, starting more fires. Within minutes, Kaga is a floating inferno. Her crew fights the fires desperately, but the damage is catastrophic and unstoppable. She burns for hours before being abandoned and scuttled. Akagi takes only 1 hit, but it turns out to be enough. Lieutenant Dick Best, leading a 3-plane section, puts his 1,000-pound bomb through the flight deck midships with perfect accuracy. The bomb explodes among aircraft being rearmed on the hangar deck, and secondary explosions from munitions and fuel turn the hangar into a fireball. Flames spread through the ship faster than damage control can possibly contain. By afternoon, the flagship of the entire Japanese striking force, Admiral Nagumo's own carrier, is abandoned. She burns through the night and is scuttled at dawn. At the same exact moment that McCluskey's bombers are hitting Akagi, Yorktown's dive bombers are attacking Soryu. 3 hits in quick succession, and all 3 bombs explode among rearming aircraft on the hangar deck. Soryu is engulfed in flames within minutes and sinks at 1913 that evening. In 5 minutes, just 5 minutes, 3 of the 4 Japanese carriers have been mortally wounded. But the battle isn't over, because Hiryu, the 4th carrier, was separated from the others and hasn't been attacked. At noon, Hiryu launches her remaining aircraft against the American carriers, and they find Yorktown first, hitting her with bombs and torpedoes that leave her dead in the water. Enterprise has to finish Hiryu, and at 15:30 in the afternoon, she launches 24 dive bombers. They find Hiryu at 17:05 and roll into their attack. 4 bombs hit, all on the flight deck, and fires start immediately. Hiryu fights desperately to survive, but the damage is too severe. She's scuttled the next morning. 4 Japanese carriers destroyed, the absolute cream of the Japanese carrier force, the pilots who attacked Pearl Harbor, all gone in one day. American losses are Yorktown and Destroyer Hammond, both sunk by submarine. Enterprise and Hornet survive undamaged. The Battle of Midway is the turning point of the entire Pacific War, and Enterprise dive bombers, led by Wade McCluskey's decision to expand his search and follow one destroyer, made the difference. August 24, 1942, the Battle of the Eastern Solomons, and Enterprise fights off massive Japanese air attacks while her own aircraft sink the light carrier Ryujo. 3 direct bomb hits and 4 near misses hit Enterprise. 74 men are killed, 95 wounded, and there's serious damage to the flight deck and hull. But Smith's damage control teams patch the holes, shore up the damaged sections, and Enterprise steams back to Pearl Harbor under her own power. She's repaired in just 5 weeks and back in action by mid-October. October 26, 1942, the Battle of Santa Cruz Islands. 2 more bomb hits, 44 more men dead, 75 wounded. Hornet is sunk, and Enterprise becomes the last carrier standing in the entire Pacific. By the end of 1942, Enterprise has participated in 5 of the 6 major carrier battles in the Pacific. The only one she missed was Carl C., and that's only because she arrived too late. She's been hit by bombs 5 times, has lost nearly 200 men killed, and has been declared sunk by Japanese propaganda 3 separate times, and she just keeps fighting. The nickname Gray Ghost fits her absolutely perfectly. The Japanese cannot understand how this ship keeps appearing in battles after they've claimed to have sunk her. Their intelligence reports become confused and contradictory. Some Japanese commanders genuinely think there must be multiple ships named Enterprise. Others believe that American damage control capabilities are far better than their intelligence estimates suggested. The truth is both of those things. American damage control doctrine is superior to Japanese practice. American carriers have better compartmentalization, better fire suppression systems, better trained repair crews. But Enterprise has something more than just good design. She has Smith, she has the CBA, she has captains like Hardison who will take a damaged ship into battle because the mission absolutely demands it. She has pilots who fly until their aircraft literally fall apart, then fly borrowed aircraft. She has a crew that genuinely believes their ship is special, that she cannot be sunk, that they will survive anything the enemy throws at them. In 1943 and 1944, as the new Essex-class carriers start joining the fleet, Enterprise's role changes somewhat. She's no longer fighting alone, but she's still very much in the fight. She participates in the Gilbert Islands campaign, the Marshall Islands campaign, the strikes against Truk, the Marianas campaign, the Battle of the Philippine Sea, and the Battle of Leyte Gulf in October 1944, which is the largest naval battle in human history. Enterprise aircraft sink 3 enemy ships and shoot down 52 enemy planes, more than any other carrier in the entire battle. She takes 2 kamikaze hits, but the damage is relatively minor because Enterprise has fought in so many battles by this point that even kamikaze crashes barely slow her down. In late 1944, Enterprise pioneers night carrier operations, becoming the first carrier equipped and trained specifically for round-the-clock air operations. Her night fighters protect the fleet from Japanese night attacks. Her night bombers strike Japanese bases in darkness when they think they're safe. And the concept proves so successful that the Navy creates dedicated night carrier air groups based on what Enterprise develops. February 1945, Enterprise supports the invasion of Iwo Jima, and her aircraft fly continuously over that island for 174 hours. 174 hours of continuous air operations without significant break. No other carrier in history has ever matched that kind of sustained endurance. March 1945, Enterprise participates in strikes against the Japanese home islands themselves. Her aircraft bombed Tokyo, Kobe, Nagawa, bringing the war directly to Japan's doorstep. She takes minor bomb damage on March 18th, but continues operations without even pausing. April 11, 1945, off Okinawa, a kamikaze crashes into the forward part of the flight deck. 14 men are killed, 34 wounded, and the forward elevator is damaged again, just like it was at Santa Cruz. Enterprise steams to Ulithi for repairs. May 14, 1945, she's back at Okinawa, and another kamikaze penetrates the flight deck and explodes near the forward elevator. 13 men killed, 68 wounded, and the explosion blows a hole through multiple decks. Fires rage throughout the forward section of the ship, but Smith's damage control teams, the teams he trained for years, contain the damage and save the ship. Enterprise survives. This is her last wound of World War II. The damage from that final kamikaze hit is severe enough that repairs take until late August. By the time Enterprise returns to the Pacific, ready to fight again, Japan has surrendered. She misses the surrender ceremony in Tokyo Bay. After 7 years of continuous service and 20 major battles, after surviving everything the Japanese could throw at her, Enterprise is sitting in a repair dock when the war finally ends. Her final tally is absolutely staggering when you actually look at the numbers. 911 enemy aircraft shot down by her fighters and gunners. 71 enemy ships sunk by her bombers and torpedo planes. 192 more enemy ships damaged or destroyed. She steamed over 275,000 miles in wartime operations. She participated in 18 of the 22 major carrier actions in the Pacific, which is more than any other American ship. Enterprise earned 20 battle stars, 3 more than any other United States warship in World War II. She received the Presidential Unit Citation. She received the Navy Unit Commendation. She was the only carrier to receive both of those honors. On November 23, 1945, at Southampton, England, the British Admiralty presented Enterprise with the Admiralty Pennant. And this is significant because it was the first time in over 400 years that this honor had been given to any foreign warship. Secretary of the Navy James Forrestal called Enterprise the one vessel that most nearly symbolizes the history of the United States Navy in World War II. But here's where the story takes a turn that honestly makes me angry every time I think about it. When the war ended, America forgot about Enterprise. She was decommissioned on February 17, 1947. Plans were announced to preserve her as a museum and memorial. Fundraising began, there were committees formed, there were announcements in newspapers, but the money never materialized. The American public, exhausted from war and focused on returning to normal peacetime life, didn't donate enough. The ship sat in reserve for years, just rusting away. In 1949, plans to make her a permanent memorial in New York were suspended due to lack of funds. Subsequent attempts to save her also failed. On July 1, 1958, Enterprise was sold to Lipset Corporation for scrapping. By March 1960, she was gone, completely gone, cut up for scrap metal at Kearny, New Jersey. The most decorated ship in United States Navy history, the carrier that fought from Pearl Harbor to Okinawa, the gray ghost that refused to die in battle, was destroyed by accountants and public indifference. Some pieces did survive. Her bell went to the Naval Academy at Annapolis. Her stern plate went to Rivervale, New Jersey. An anchor went to the Washington Navy Yard. A few portholes and fittings were saved by veterans who served on her. But the ship itself, the actual vessel that made all that history, was erased, melted down, turned into who knows what. Herschel Smith, the damage control officer who kept Enterprise fighting through 20 major battles, who understood that ship better than anyone, retired from the Navy as a captain. He never received a major decoration specifically for his work on Enterprise. The official records credited Enterprise's survival to her design and her crew collectively. Smith's name appears in some after-action reports and nothing more. He went back to civilian life, and most people never knew what he had done, never knew that his knowledge and quick thinking saved that ship and possibly changed the outcome of the war. Captain Hardison, who commanded Enterprise during those desperate November 1942 battles when she was the only carrier left, eventually rose to vice admiral before retiring. He died in February 1959 from injuries sustained in a car accident. He was buried at Arlington National Cemetery with full honors. His papers are preserved at the University of North Carolina. But honestly, how many people today could tell you his name or what he did? The construction battalion workers, the Seabees, who repaired Enterprise while under fire at Guadalcanal, they returned to construction work after the war. Most of them never talked about what they'd done. They were construction workers, not heroes in their own minds. They built things, that's what they did. They went back to building highways and bridges and homes in peacetime America, and the story of how they kept a carrier fighting mostly faded away into obscurity. Wade McCluskey, the air group commander who led Enterprise bombers to victory at Midway, retired as a rear admiral. He died in 1976. His decision at Midway, when he spotted that lone Japanese destroyer and made the call to follow it, when he gambled everything on finding that enemy fleet, that decision changed the entire course of the war in the Pacific. But if you go out on the street today and ask people who Wade McCluskey was, almost nobody knows. The pilots who flew from Enterprise, the men who made her the most dangerous ship in the Pacific through their skill and courage, mostly returned to civilian life after the war. Some stayed in the Navy and made it a career. Some became airline pilots. Some went back to farms in Iowa and factories in Michigan and offices in California. They had fought in the greatest naval war in human history, seen things that most people couldn't even imagine, and then they came home and went back to being ordinary Americans. They didn't talk much about what they'd seen or done. That generation didn't, generally. 30,000 men served aboard Enterprise during her 9 years of active service. 103 enlisted men and 1 officer earned all 20 battle stars awarded to the ship, which means they served through every single battle from Pearl Harbor to Okinawa. Their names are preserved in Navy records in some archive somewhere. Their stories are mostly forgotten. In 1958, the same year that the original Enterprise was sold for scrap and destroyed, the Navy commissioned a new carrier with the same name, USS Enterprise CV-6, and she became the first nuclear-powered aircraft carrier in history. She served for an incredible 51 years, longer than any other carrier. She was commissioned in November 1961, deployed to the Mediterranean and the Pacific, participated in the Cuban Missile Crisis, served multiple combat tours in Vietnam, conducted operations in the Indian Ocean and Persian Gulf. The name lived on through decades of the Cold War and beyond. In the future, another Enterprise will be built, CVN-80, a Ford-class supercarrier that's scheduled for completion in the 2030s. The name will not die. The tradition continues forward into the future. But the original Enterprise, the actual Gray Ghost, the carrier that fought from Pearl Harbor to Okinawa and earned more honors than any other ship in the fleet, she exists now only in photographs and memories, and in the stories passed down by those who served aboard her. There's a real lesson in how Enterprise was lost, and it's worth thinking about. America spent billions of dollars in 1940s money building her. Thousands of men served aboard her over the years. She fought in every major battle of the Pacific War. She earned more decorations than any other ship in the fleet. She symbolized American naval power at its absolute finest moment. And then, when the war ended and she was no longer needed for fighting, she was scrapped because nobody wanted to pay for her preservation. Just like that, gone. But here's the thing. The failure to save Enterprise actually became a wake-up call that fundamentally changed how America preserves its military heritage. After her loss, after people realized what had been destroyed, preservation movements gained real momentum and support. Veterans groups organized more effectively. Fundraising became more professional and sustained. Public awareness increased about the importance of saving these historic vessels before they disappeared forever. USS Intrepid became a museum in New York. USS Hornet became a museum in California. USS Lexington became a museum in Texas. USS Yorktown became a museum in South Carolina. 4 Essex-class carriers were saved. 1 Midway-class carrier was saved. These ships now educate millions of visitors every single year about naval history, about sacrifice, about the men who served and what they went through. But Enterprise, the ship that mattered most, the carrier that earned more battle stars than any other vessel in American naval history, She was gone before anyone fully understood what was being lost. That loss taught America a lesson that hasn't been forgotten. In 1991, a historian researching carrier operations in World War II was going through Navy archives and found the complete story of Enterprise. All the war damage reports, the action reports after every battle, the citations and commendations, the crew rosters, the detailed account of how one carrier, damaged at Santa Cruz and hastily repaired by construction workers, fought through the entire naval battle of Guadalcanal and fundamentally changed the Pacific War. The historian tried to find veterans to interview, people who had actually been there and could tell the story in their own words. Many had already died by 1991, because we're talking about 50 years after the events, but some remained. They were in their 70s and 80s by then, old men, but they remembered. They remembered everything. They remembered the smell, that distinctive combination of aviation fuel and burning metal and salt water and sweat. They remembered the sounds, the roar of aircraft engines spooling up for launch, the rapid firing of anti-aircraft guns during attacks, the explosion sounds that you feel in your chest as much as hear. They remembered the physical sensation of the deck shaking violently under bomb impacts, the way the whole ship would shudder and groan. They remembered their shipmates who died, remembered their names and faces and the jokes they told and where they were from. They remembered November 1942 with absolute clarity, when Enterprise was the only American carrier left in the entire Pacific, when she sailed into battle while still under emergency repair, when construction workers were literally welding steel plates on her flight deck while Japanese aircraft were attacking. They remembered knowing that their ship had made the actual difference between victory and defeat. That's how naval power actually works in real war. Not in theory or in peacetime exercises, but in actual combat when everything is on the line. It doesn't work through having the newest ships or the biggest guns or the most advanced technology, though all those things certainly help. It works through sailors and officers who keep damaged ships fighting when regulations say they should withdraw. It works through construction workers who repair carriers under fire because the mission demands it. It works through pilots who fly one more mission when they're so exhausted they can barely see straight and their hands are shaking from fatigue. It works through damage control teams who run toward fires and explosions instead of away from them, who fight flooding and patch holes and restore systems while the ship is actively heading back into combat. That's what actually wins wars at sea. Enterprise was the most dangerous American warship of World War II, but not for the reasons you might initially think. She wasn't the biggest. She was smaller than some of the later carriers. She wasn't the newest. There were more modern designs. She wasn't the most heavily armed or the fastest. She was dangerous because she absolutely refused to quit. She was dangerous because her crew genuinely believed, down to their core, that she could not be sunk no matter what the enemy did. She was dangerous because every single time the Japanese declared her destroyed, every time Tokyo Radio announced that Enterprise had been sent to the bottom, she appeared again in the next battle. The Gray Ghost, the ship that refused to die no matter how many times they killed her. You know, there's something about that name, Gray Ghost, that really captures what she was. It wasn't an official Navy designation. They never called her that in official communications, but the Japanese did. And the name spread and stuck because it was perfect. That's exactly what she was, a ghost ship, appearing out of nowhere when you thought the Americans had no carriers left, striking hard with her aircraft, disappearing into the vast Pacific, and then appearing again when everyone thought she'd been sunk. The Japanese tried absolutely everything to destroy her. They hit her with bombs at Eastern Solomons. They hit her again with bombs at Santa Cruz. They crashed kamikazes into her at Okinawa. They hit her repeatedly, again and again, and every single time, she survived and came back for more. There's a Japanese after-action report from late 1942 that was declassified decades after the war ended, and the officer writing it is clearly frustrated as he tries to explain to his superiors why Enterprise keeps showing up in battles. He writes, and I'm paraphrasing because I don't have the exact translation in front of me, Something like, the Americans must have multiple carriers named Enterprise operating simultaneously, or their repair and damage control capabilities exceed our intelligence estimates by a very significant margin. No single ship could possibly sustain the level of damage we have confirmed inflicting and continue to operate effectively. But it was one ship, one single vessel, one crew, one damage control officer who knew every inch of her hull and every system aboard, one construction worker who figured out how to weld steel plates under combat conditions, one captain after another who would take her into battle regardless of her condition because the mission required it and there was no other choice. And here's what's truly remarkable about all of this. What really stands out when you read the first-hand accounts and letters and diaries. Nobody on Enterprise thought what they were doing was particularly special or heroic. Talk to the veterans, read their oral histories that were recorded later, look at their personal papers. They didn't think they were heroes doing extraordinary things. Smith, the damage control officer, he thought he was just fixing problems, just doing his job. The construction workers thought they were just welding, just doing what they'd been trained to do. The pilots thought they were just flying their assigned missions. The crew thought they were just following orders and doing their duty. But what they actually accomplished, what they really did when you step back and look at the big picture, was save the Pacific War at the exact moment when it hung by the thinnest possible thread. Think about November 1942 for a moment. Really think about the strategic situation. One carrier, one single aircraft carrier, damaged and patched up with jury-rigged repairs, standing between the Japanese Navy and complete control of the Solomon Islands. If Enterprise had been sunk in that battle, if she'd been too damaged to fight effectively, if those construction workers hadn't been able to patch her up enough to make her operational, the Japanese would have retaken Guadalcanal. They would have secured their supply lines. They would have cut off Australia from American support. They would have controlled the entire Pacific theater for months or possibly years longer than they did. The war would have dragged on with who knows how many more casualties. The atomic bombs might have been used differently or in different circumstances. The entire outcome might have been different. But she didn't sink. She fought. And because she fought, because her crew kept her operational and her pilots kept flying and her damage control teams kept her afloat, the course of history changed. There's a photograph that I've seen. It was taken at Noumea on November 11th, 1942, just as Enterprise was leaving the harbor to head back into combat. You can clearly see the damage, even in the black and white photo. The bulge in the starboard side where the hull was buckled is visible. The hastily welded patches on the flight deck look exactly like what they are, rough emergency repairs. You can actually see some of the construction workers still on deck, still working as the ship is literally steaming out of the harbor toward the combat zone. Sparks are visible from welding torches. And if you look really closely at the photograph, you can see members of the crew on deck, standing at the rails, watching the island of New Caledonia disappear behind them as they head back north. They're watching safety disappear. They know they're heading back into combat. They know the ship isn't fully repaired. They know that if they take another hit in the wrong place, Enterprise will sink fast and most of them will die. But they're going anyway because that's the mission. That's what has to be done, and there's nobody else to do it. In 1944, after the Battle of Leyte Gulf, a young sailor who had just joined Enterprise a few months earlier wrote a letter home to his parents. And in it, he tried to explain what it was like serving on this particular ship. He wrote, and this is a direct quote because the letter was preserved, "I don't really know how to explain it to you. This ship, she's different from other ships I've seen. The men who've been here since '41, since Pearl Harbor, they have this belief about Enterprise. They believe she can't be sunk, that she'll survive anything. And after what I've seen in just these few months, after the battles we've been through, I'm starting to believe it too. There's something about this ship." That belief, that confidence, that absolute conviction that their ship was special and would survive, it mattered in ways that are hard to quantify, but were very real. It mattered in combat when bombs were falling all around and the ship was shaking from explosions and men were dying and everything was chaos. It mattered when damage control teams had to make the decision to run toward fires instead of away from them, to go into flooded compartments instead of sealing them from the outside. It mattered when pilots had to take off from a damaged flight deck in rough seas and somehow navigate across hundreds of miles of ocean and find their targets and fight their way through enemy defenses and then somehow find their way back to a moving carrier that was just a tiny speck in an enormous ocean. That belief that their ship was special, that Enterprise couldn't be sunk, that they would survive and come home, it gave them the confidence to do things that might otherwise have seemed impossible. Enterprise had something that you really can't measure or quantify in any kind of official report or statistical analysis. She had a spirit, an ethos, a culture of excellence and determination. When you look at the history of the United States Navy, when you look at all the different ships that have carried the name Enterprise over the centuries, that spirit is what they all share and what connects them. The original Enterprise was a 6-gun schooner that captured the first British warship in the War of 1812. CV-6 was the gray ghost of World War II that we've been talking about. CVN-65 was Big E, the first nuclear carrier, serving with distinction for half a century through the Cold War. CVN-80 will be the future Ford-class carrier that hasn't even been completed yet, but will carry that name and tradition forward. The name Enterprise carries enormous weight in naval history. It carries the accumulated legacy of centuries. It carries the memory of thousands of men who served on ships with that name and refused to quit no matter what they faced. But here's the thing that honestly bothers me, that keeps me up at night sometimes when I think about it. Most Americans today, if you stop them on the street and ask them about Enterprise, they have no idea what you're talking about. They don't know the story. They don't know about Smith and the construction battalion and those 4 crucial days in November 1942 when one carrier quite literally changed everything. They don't know that the ship that mattered most, the vessel that earned more honors and fought in more battles than any other in American naval history, was cut up for scrap metal because nobody wanted to pay to preserve her. There's an entire generation, the World War II generation, the men who actually fought that war and served on these ships and saw these things happen, and they're almost all gone now. The youngest World War II veterans are in their late 90s, if they're still alive at all. The ones who served on Enterprise, who flew from her flight deck, who welded her hull and fought her fires and kept her engines running, they're almost all gone. And when they die, when that last Enterprise veteran dies and there's nobody left who actually served on her, what remains? Some photographs and archives, some official documents and after-action reports, battle stars in a display case somewhere, some pieces of the ship scattered in various museums and memorials. But the ship herself, the actual vessel, she doesn't exist anymore. You can visit Intrepid in New York and walk her flight deck and stand where pilots stood before launching into combat and see the ready rooms and the hangar deck and the bridge. You can touch that history. You can feel the connection to the past. But you can't do that with Enterprise. She doesn't exist. She's gone. All that remains are the stories. And stories fade over time unless someone actively works to keep them alive and pass them on. So that's why I'm telling you this story today. That's why this matters and why I think it's important that people know about Enterprise and what she did and what her crew accomplished. Because somewhere out there, in the vastness of the Pacific Ocean, in the deep water off the Solomon Islands, pieces of Enterprise still remain. Not the ship herself, because she was scrapped in New Jersey, but the aircraft she lost in combat. The Devastators and Dauntlesses and Avengers and Wildcats that went down fighting, that were shot down or crashed or ran out of fuel and ditched. They're still down there, 2 miles down in the darkness and the cold, resting on the bottom. And in some of those aircraft wrecks are the men who flew them, the pilots and radio men and gunners who never came back. Their names are engraved on memorials. Their families received telegrams from the War Department, but their bodies are still down there in their aircraft, still at their posts after all these decades. Enterprise lost over 200 men killed in action during World War II. Some died aboard the ship when bombs hit. Some died in aircraft that were shot down over enemy territory or over the ocean. Some died later in hospitals from their wounds. But they all served on the same ship. They all wore the same uniform. They all believed they were part of something much larger than themselves, and they were absolutely right about that. Enterprise was more than just a ship, more than just steel and machinery and aircraft. She was a symbol of something important, a symbol of American determination and refusal to accept defeat, a symbol of American industrial power and technical capability, a symbol of the American fighting spirit. When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, they genuinely thought they had crippled American naval power so badly that the United States would have no choice but to negotiate a peace settlement and accept Japanese dominance in the Pacific. They thought wrong. They completely misjudged American resolve and capability. Enterprise, damaged and outnumbered and outgunned, kept fighting month after month. And in doing so, she showed the Japanese and the rest of the world that America would not quit, would not surrender, would not accept defeat, that no matter how many times they hit her, she would get back up and keep fighting. That's the real story of Enterprise when you strip everything else away. It's not really about the battles, though those are important and dramatic. It's not about the statistics and numbers, though those are impressive. The real story is about refusal. Refusal to accept defeat. Refusal to give up when things look hopeless. Refusal to quit even when you're the last one standing. And that spirit, that absolute determination, that's what makes Enterprise the most dangerous American warship of World War II. Not her guns or her aircraft or her armor plating, her crew. The men who served on her and believed in her and kept her fighting when every regulation said she should withdraw to a shipyard. Smith, standing on that damaged flight deck in November 1942, watching construction workers weld steel plates while knowing his ship was about to sail back into combat, he wasn't thinking about making history. He wasn't thinking about medals or recognition or how this would be remembered decades later. He was thinking about how to keep his ship alive for one more battle, how to keep his men alive, how to complete the mission they'd been given. That's what all of them were thinking, from the captain down to the newest seaman. Just do the job in front of you. Survive, fight, win. Take it one day at a time, one mission at a time, one battle at a time. And they did. They won. Enterprise survived the entire war. She came home. Her crew came home. Most of them anyway. And then America, in peacetime, destroyed what the entire Japanese military couldn't destroy in 4 years of war. That's the tragedy of this story. That's what was lost and can never be recovered. But the story itself remains, and it will continue to remain as long as people tell it and pass it on and remember what happened. So if you found this story compelling, if it meant something to you, I want to ask you to do something. Don't just hit the like button, though please do that. Don't just subscribe, though please do that too. Actually tell someone about Enterprise. Tell someone about the men who served on her. Tell someone about the ship that refused to die. Share this video. Talk about it. Keep the story alive because these stories matter. They matter because they remind us of what human beings are capable of when everything is on the line. They matter because they show us that ordinary people, construction workers and farm boys and mechanics and regular Americans can accomplish extraordinary things when circumstances demand it. They matter because they're true, because this actually happened, because these were real men who did real things that changed the course of history. So there you have it. If this kind of deep dive history is your thing, there's plenty more where this came from. Matter of fact, I've got another video. You can check that out next by clicking up here, and I'll catch you over there.